Right now, at this very moment, two of the most powerful warships ever constructed by human hands are converging on the same body of water. One is already there, its flight deck pointing east toward the Iranian coastline. The other just crossed the Strait of Gibraltar 4 days ago, stopping briefly in Ceuta Bay, Greece, to resupply before continuing its journey toward a confrontation that could reshape the entire Middle East, and possibly the global economy with it. This is not hypothetical. This is not projection. This is Tuesday, February 24th, 2026. And the situation around Iran has reached a level of tension that no serious analyst is describing as routine. Let me walk you through everything. Every piece of this puzzle. Because what is happening right now is the product of years of decisions, provocations, miscalculations, and hard choices. And it is accelerating in real time. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group has been operating in the Arabian Sea for weeks. It was positioned there as the Trump administration began rebuilding its maximum pressure campaign against Tehran following a series of events that cascaded faster than most people were following. Alongside it, destroyer escorts carrying Tomahawk cruise missiles, aircraft flying combat patrols, pilots on standby, a floating airbase that never needs permission from any country to park where it chooses, because international waters belong to no one and to everyone. Then came the order that changed the geometry of the entire situation. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest and most technologically advanced aircraft carrier ever built, was pulled out of the Caribbean and redirected east. Yet the crew had already been at sea since leaving Norfolk, Virginia, on June 24, 2025. 8 months away from home. They had already crossed the Atlantic once to operate in European waters. They had already been redirected again to the Caribbean, where they participated in Operation Southern Spear, the large-scale naval operation that ended with the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. And now, rather than sailing home, they received new orders: head to the Middle East. The Ford's deployment, if it extends beyond mid-April, will break the post-Vietnam War record for the longest aircraft carrier deployment in American history. The previous record was 294 days. The crew is looking at a number higher than that. Think about what that means for a moment. These are real people. Sailors with children they haven't held in 8 months. Partners who plan their lives around a 7-month deployment that is now stretched into something no one originally agreed to. Admiral Daryl Caudle, the chief of naval operations, had publicly said before this new order that he would push back on further extensions, citing the human cost and the maintenance challenges they create. He lost that argument. The operational demand outweighed the concern. The Ford crossed the Strait of Gibraltar on February 20th, 2026. Eyewitnesses photographed it. It is real, it is moving, and it is carrying roughly 70 aircraft and a crew of approximately 4,500 people toward the most volatile theater on the planet. To understand why this is happening, you need to understand the full context of what has occurred over the last 8 months. Not just the headlines, but the actual sequence of events that led to this specific moment. In June of 2025, the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Trump described those strikes as having obliterated Iran's nuclear program. The reality is more complicated. Iran has barred international inspectors since those strikes, so the actual damage remains contested. What is not contested is Iran's response to those strikes. Rather than capitulating, Tehran declared it had reconstructed everything that was damaged. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated publicly that Iran's military is now in a better position than it was before the strikes. Whether that is accurate or calculated defiance is a question intelligence agencies are still working to answer. What it represents strategically is a direct challenge to the theory that military pressure alone can permanently neutralize Iran's nuclear ambitions. Then came December 28, 2025. Iran's economy, already battered by decades of sanctions, the 12-day war with Israel, and chronic mismanagement, collapsed further when the rial plummeted to record lows against the dollar. Shopkeepers in Tehran's Grand Bazaar pulled down their shutters and walked into the streets, Within days, protests spread to all 31 provinces. Millions of people in the streets demanding change, chanting slogans that went far beyond economic grievances and cut directly at the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic itself. Voices calling for the end of the clerical system. Voices from a generation that has watched its country decline, its currency evaporate, and its leaders kill their own people every time they dared to speak. The regime's response was catastrophic in its brutality. On January 8th and 9th of 2026, Iranian security forces, operating under a near-total internet blackout that the regime imposed to prevent the outside world from watching, opened fire on demonstrators with live ammunition. The death toll estimates vary enormously because of the information blackout, and they vary in a direction that should horrify every person watching this video. The Iranian government's own figures acknowledged over 3,000 deaths. Human rights organizations operating outside Iran put the number between 18,000 and 36,500. One report from Time magazine cited 30,304 protest-related deaths registered in civilian hospitals for those 2 days alone. Think about that number. Think about what it means. In 48 hours. In a country whose own president, Masoud Pezeshkian, later apologized to the nation for the crackdown. A president who acknowledged what happened, but who, in the structure of the Islamic Republic, controls none of the security forces that carried it out. Those forces answer to the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, who reportedly ordered the crackdown with the instruction to crush the protests by any means necessary. Amnesty International described January 2026 as the deadliest period of repression by Iranian authorities in decades of their research. The EU designated the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization in direct response. The United Kingdom announced new sanctions legislation. The United Nations expressed outrage. And Donald Trump, watching the footage that was leaking out despite the blackout, said something he has now repeated multiple times. Help is on the way. He told the Iranian people directly that he would not stand by while the regime executed its own citizens. Those executions did not ultimately materialize at the scale that had been feared, in part because Trump's threat of military action appeared to create some deterrence. The regime stepped back from executing arrested demonstrators, at least temporarily. Talks between the U.S. and Iran resumed, first in Oman on February 6th, then a second round in Geneva on February 17th. A third round is scheduled for this Thursday, February 26th, also in Geneva. But here is the critical thing you need to understand about those talks, because the way they are being reported in some places creates a false impression of progress. Yes, there were talks. Yes. Both sides described the atmosphere as constructive. Yes, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said they reached broad agreement on guiding principles. But when you look at the actual substance of what was and was not agreed, the picture is very different. The United States entered these negotiations with a clear red line: zero enrichment. America's position, stated repeatedly by senior officials, is that Iran cannot have any domestic uranium enrichment capability, because any such capability represents a potential pathway to a nuclear weapon. Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff, who is leading the American side alongside Jared Kushner, stated publicly that the president is curious as to why Iran has not simply capitulated. That is the American frame for these conversations. Capitulation. Iran's position is the polar opposite. Araghchi described uranium enrichment as a matter of national dignity and pride. He said Iran has the right to enrich uranium as a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. He said any final agreement must allow Iran to maintain its enrichment capability. The furthest Iran has moved from its baseline position in these talks is an offer to suspend enrichment for 3 to 5 years, which notably would extend beyond Trump's second term, effectively kicking the fundamental issue down the road without resolving it. Iran has also offered to eliminate its stockpile of 60% enriched uranium, the material that was already close to weapons grade before the June 2025 strikes. But Tehran refuses to permanently dismantle the infrastructure itself. Vice President J.D. Vance, summarized the American assessment after the Geneva talks clearly. He said that in some ways the talks went well, but that it was very clear the president has set red lines that the Iranians are not yet willing to acknowledge and work through. The IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi, who attended the Geneva talks, described an obvious gap between the two positions on enrichment. He did not say the gap was narrowing, he said it was obvious. Meanwhile, as diplomats talked in Geneva, the Pentagon was moving steel. More than 50 F-35, F-22, and F-16 fighter jets were repositioned to the region over a 24-hour window during the talks themselves. Satellite imagery showed refueling tanker aircraft accumulating at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, while decreasing at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. The logic being that Al Udeid, sitting on the Persian Gulf, would be far more vulnerable to Iranian ballistic missile retaliation than a base deeper inside Saudi territory. The military was physically repositioning its assets to reduce exposure to the opening wave of an Iranian counterstrike. That is not routine logistics. That is preparation. And then, on February 20th, Trump said something that removed whatever ambiguity remained about where this is heading if talks collapse. He stated that he had given Iran a 10 to 15-day deadline to reach a deal. He said failure to reach a deal would result in very bad things. He had already said publicly, without flinching, that regime change in Iran would be the best thing that could happen. Khamenei responded the next day by telling his supporters not to fear the American carrier, because Iran, he claimed, possesses weapons capable of sending it to the bottom of the sea. The Ford crossed into the Mediterranean that same day. So let us talk about what the military dimension of this actually looks like. Not the politics. The hardware? The USS Gerald R. Ford is not a normal aircraft carrier. It is a generational leap forward in what a carrier can do. The ship stretches more than 1,100 feet in length and displaces over 100,000 tons of water. It is nuclear-powered, meaning it does not need to stop for fuel. Its electromagnetic aircraft launch system, known as EMALS, replaced the old steam catapult technology and allows the ship to launch aircraft faster and with less mechanical strain on the airframes. The result is an operational tempo the Ford can sustain that older carriers cannot match. While a Nimitz-class carrier can generate roughly 120 flight operations per day under sustained conditions, the Ford is rated for up to 160. That gap matters when you are running a 24-hour strike campaign against a country with layered air defenses and a large missile arsenal. The Ford's Air Wing, Carrier Air Wing 8, includes multiple squadrons of F/A-18E and F/A-18F Super Hornets, the workhorses of naval aviation for strike, close air support, and escort. But the aircraft that would lead any serious operation against Iran's air defense network are the F-35C Lightning IIs. These fifth-generation stealth fighters are built around a single operating principle. Get into airspace that is too dangerous for anything else. Strike the targets that other aircraft cannot reach, and leave before the adversary fully understands what happened. Against Iran's layered air defense system, which includes Russian-origin surface-to-air missile batteries, radar installations, and interoperability between ground-based systems and interceptors, the F-35 is the tool specifically designed to tear holes in that defensive fabric before anything else arrives. The USS Abraham Lincoln, already on station, brings its own air wing. Combined, the two carrier strike groups represent more aircraft, more strike sorties, and more sustained operational capacity than the United States has deployed to any single theater since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Military analysts have noted that two carriers generate roughly 33% more combat sorties than a single carrier, which sounds incremental until you realize what that means operationally. It means no pause, no recovery window, no period in which Iran's military can regroup, reposition damaged systems, or repair command and control infrastructure before the next wave arrives. It means continuous pressure, day and night, across multiple target sets simultaneously. The EA-18G Growler aircraft deserve particular attention because they represent a capability that does not make headlines but could be the decisive factor in any confrontation with Iran. The Growler is the electronic warfare variant of the Super Hornet, and its mission is to jam, blind, deceive, and destroy the electromagnetic systems that an adversary relies on to fight. Iran has invested heavily in drone swarm tactics. The logic is straightforward. Individual drones are cheap. They can be produced in large numbers, and if you send enough of them at a target simultaneously, you overwhelm the target's ability to intercept everyone. It is a strategy that has been validated in conflicts across the region over the past decade. The Growler-Hawkeye combination is specifically designed to defeat this strategy. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye airborne radar platform, which sees everything in a battle space out to hundreds of miles, detects the swarm early. The Growler then blankets the entire formation with jamming, cutting off the guidance and communication systems of every drone in the swarm simultaneously. You do not shoot down each drone. You shut down the entire swarm at once. This matters because Iran's most credible asymmetric capabilities, drone swarms, fast attack boat tactics in the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, and proxy activation across multiple countries simultaneously, are the tools it has been counting on to impose costs on any American military operation. They are the tools that were supposed to make the price of attacking Iran too high. The presence of two carrier strike groups with their full electronic warfare capabilities is, in part, a direct answer to that calculation. America is not just bringing overwhelming firepower. It is bringing the specific tools designed to neutralize Iran's specific counters. Completing the picture, the destroyer and cruiser escorts of both carrier strike groups carry Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles. These are precision weapons that fly low, navigate terrain, and strike targets deep inside enemy territory without requiring a pilot to survive the threat environment. There are hundreds of them available. They do not require overflight permissions. They do not get shot down by the same interceptors designed to target manned aircraft. They are the silent component of a combined arms strike operation, whose visible components are already imposing enough. And yet, and this is the part that every honest military analyst eventually gets to, and the part that no amount of air power can resolve. You can destroy a centrifuge hall. You cannot destroy a decision. This is the problem at the center of everything. Even a comprehensive and successful military campaign against Iran's nuclear infrastructure does not eliminate Iran's nuclear knowledge, Iran's technical workforce, Iran's institutional memory, or Iran's motivation to reconstitute. The estimates for how long a comprehensive set of strikes could delay Iran's nuclear timeline range from 2 years on the pessimistic end to roughly a decade on the optimistic end. And those estimates come with enormous uncertainty because Iran has barred international inspectors since June 2025, and the actual state of its program is not fully known. What is known is that Iran has already demonstrated once, after the 2025 strikes, that it will attempt to rebuild whatever is destroyed. A post-strike Iran, humiliated in front of its own people, facing international sympathy shifting in its direction as images of destruction circulate, with its government under existential pressure to prove that the Islamic Republic can survive American military action, would have every political incentive to reconstitute faster, more covertly, and with a determination that the pre-strike program never possessed. This is not an argument against military action. It is the reality that any honest assessment of military options must include. Strikes can buy time. They cannot buy a permanent solution. The permanent solution requires either a negotiated agreement that is verified, comprehensive, and durable, or a change in the Iranian political system itself. Which brings us back to where we are today. The third round of U.S.-Iran talks is scheduled for this Thursday in Geneva. Iran is arriving with what its foreign minister describes as a detailed counter-proposal. The United States is arriving with red lines that have not moved. Both sides say they want a deal. Both sides say the other side's current position makes a deal impossible. Iran refuses to abandon enrichment permanently. America refuses to accept any deal that leaves enrichment in place. The IAEA chief says the gap is obvious. The Omani mediators who facilitated both previous rounds say there is a positive push to go the extra mile. That is diplomatic language for, we are not there yet, and we are not sure we will get there, but we have not given up. Meanwhile, the Ford is at Suda Bay in Greece, days away from joining the Lincoln in the theater. Trump has given a 10 to 15-day deadline that, if you count from February 20th, puts the window closing right around the beginning of March. A second wave of protests has broken out inside Iran, beginning in western provinces on February 21st. Iran's currency has weakened further, the dollar rising toward 1.63 million rials. The Iranian financial outlets are running headlines about diplomacy under the shadow of military movements. The Iranian people who are protesting are singing the national anthem at funerals for the victims of the January crackdown. The regime is under pressure from every direction simultaneously. Externally from American military positioning, internally from a population that has reached a breaking point, and economically from the accumulated weight of decades of sanctions compounded by the destruction of the June 2025 war. The regional stakes extend far beyond Iran's borders. The Strait of Hormuz, a waterway barely 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, handles roughly 20% of the world's traded oil. Any serious Iranian mining or interdiction operation in those waters would send oil prices toward levels not seen since the energy crises of the 1970s. Europe, still fragile after years of energy disruption, would face immediate inflationary shock. China, the world's largest importer of Gulf oil, would face an energy crisis with domestic political consequences that Beijing cannot absorb quietly. Japan and South Korea, almost entirely dependent on Gulf supplies, would begin emergency rationing conversations within days. The global economy does not have the cushion it would need to absorb that kind of shock without significant pain. The regional military picture is equally complex. U.S. bases across the region, in Qatar, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, and elsewhere, are all within range of Iranian ballistic missiles. Iran's foreign minister has stated explicitly that if the U.S. attacks, Iran will target American military installations throughout the region because it lacks the capability to strike American territory directly. The IRGC has made the same point through multiple channels. Iran's proxy network, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, represents additional pressure points that can be activated simultaneously, forcing the U.S. and its allies to manage multiple fronts at once while the core campaign against Iran is still ongoing. It is a strategy explicitly designed to maximize the political cost of American military action, and it has been refined and practiced for decades. But the United States has thought about this. The positioning of two carrier strike groups is not only about offensive firepower. It is about defensive density, about presenting so many simultaneous threats that Iran cannot concentrate its response against any single one. Every ballistic missile Iran fires at a regional base is a missile Iran fires once and cannot quickly replace. Every drone swarm directed at a carrier group is a drone swarm being jammed and defeated rather than striking its intended target. The American military planning logic is attritional. Iran cannot sustain pressure on every front simultaneously while absorbing continuous carrier-based strikes on its own territory. Its resources split. Its command structure degrades under sustained electronic warfare. Its response capability erodes over days and weeks. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which privately would not mourn the end of Iran's nuclear program, are walking the tightrope they have perfected over years. Quiet cooperation in private. Calls for restraint at Arab League podiums. Jordan and Saudi Arabia have both officially stated they will not allow their territory to be used for strikes against Iran. Statements that carry less weight than they might appear to, given the history of these countries' actual cooperation with American operations. Iraq, caught between its American security relationships and its Iranian political connections, is fracturing at the governmental level. Ministers from opposing factions issuing contradictory statements because they cannot agree on which catastrophe threatens them more. Russia watches the entire situation with careful calculation, not with alarm, because elevated energy prices and American military expenditure in a distant theater serve Russian strategic interests in ways that require no Russian action whatsoever. The question that sits at the center of all of this is not a military question. The military dimension is largely resolved. The United States possesses overwhelming and specific advantages in every category relevant to this confrontation. The question is a political and historical one. What does the region look like the morning after? A deal in Geneva this week, a real deal, not a delay, would change the trajectory dramatically. It would require Iran to accept permanent restrictions on enrichment, not a 3 to 5 year pause. It would require the United States to accept some form of civilian nuclear activity in Iran, not a complete dismantlement. It would require both sides to find language that lets their domestic audiences read the outcome as acceptable. That gap is currently described as obvious by the IAEA Director General. It is not unbridgeable by definition. Gaps that look unbridgeable have been bridged before in diplomacy. The question is whether the deadline Trump has imposed creates enough pressure to force movement before the carriers arrive in position and the military option becomes the default. Iran's President Pezeshkian said on Sunday that the negotiations have produced encouraging signals. He also said Iran has made all necessary preparations for any potential scenario. Both things are true simultaneously. Iran is negotiating seriously and preparing for war simultaneously. Because the regime calculates that appearing to negotiate is its best short-term defense against military action, while preparing for war is its only long-term insurance policy if negotiations fail. Trump said this past week that he wants a meaningful deal. He also said that without one, very bad things happen. His envoy Steve Witkoff said publicly he is wondering why Iran has not capitulated. His vice president said the president's red lines have not been acknowledged by Tehran. The military buildup continues regardless of the diplomatic track. Two things are happening simultaneously. Only one of them will define what comes next for this region and for everyone whose life is touched by it. The Ford will arrive in position within days. The deadline expires around March 1st or 2nd, depending on how you count Trump's stated 10 to 15 days from February 20th. The third round of talks happens Thursday. Iran arrives with a counterproposal. America arrives with red lines. The Omani mediators hope for a positive push. What we know at Fireline TV is this: history does not announce itself in advance. It does not tell you in the moment that what you are watching is the thing that everything will look later to have pivoted on. You feel it in the pressure, in the weight of events accumulating, in the way that decision makers are not sleeping normally and military planners are not running normal schedules, in the way that 4,500 sailors who thought they were going home are instead crossing the Mediterranean for the third time on the same deployment. Iran's supreme leader, an 86-year-old man who has controlled the Islamic Republic for over 3 decades and who survived a decade of war with Iraq when he was young, told his supporters not to fear the carrier because Iran has weapons that can sink it. That is the posture of a man who is either genuinely unafraid or who has decided that showing fear at this moment would be more dangerous than showing resolve. Those two things are not the same, and the difference between them may determine whether the Strait of Hormuz remains open next month. The diplomats are talking, the carriers are moving, the deadline is closing, the region is holding its breath. We will keep watching. We will keep bringing you the full picture, not the simplified version, not the version that fits into a 30-second clip, but the actual context, the actual stakes, the actual sequence of events that explains why we are at this precise moment in history. Because understanding what is happening is the first step toward being able to think clearly about what should happen next. If this kind of deep, factual, no-noise analysis is what you're looking for, you are in the right place. Fireline TV exists specifically to cut through the noise and bring you the real story, properly contextualized with actual sourcing, about the things that actually matter. If this video gave you something that the mainstream news cycle did not, hit the subscribe button right now. Not later. Right now. Because the next 72 hours around this story are going to move fast, and when they do, Fireline TV will be here with the full breakdown before anyone else has caught up. Subscribe to Fireline TV, turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who wants to understand what is actually happening in the world. We will see you on the next one.